welcome back. It is good to be in a room. And I thought we'd actually take a moment, and we have a couple of folks that are new to the committee, which I am excited about as well. But we didn't see each other last year. And I thought it might be useful to go around with introductions, and I may be a little more creative in what we do with those of us old representatives. But I might start with our staff, and if you just tell us a little about which area each of you work with, that would be great. And I'd like to start with Colleen Coker, who I'd like to welcome to the committee, who is our committee assistant. Apparently I wore out our committee assistant last year, but excited to have Colleen with us to help us through this year. So welcome to committee. Is there something we should get to know about Colleen?
No.
Okay. We'll let the committee assistants get by lightly. But if the microphone is on, Eileen, if you'd flip that around and just start around the table and share a little bit about which area each of you work with and your names. Thanks.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Eileen Ma from the Revisor Statutes Office, and this is my 8th session. All 8 sessions, I've been fortunate enough to deal with financial institutions and insurance. I've also dealt with health and human services and public health and welfare.
Hi, I'm David Weiss, also with the Revisor Statutes Office. This is my 12th session now, and I've been, I do the CAPER side, the pension side of things. I do also financial institutions, and then some appropriations budget work as well. So we'd be here.
I'm Melissa Rennick with Legislative Research. This is my 20th session, and I work in the areas primarily of insurance and pensions, as well as financial institutions and topics particularly related to healthcare.
Hi, I'm Leanne Thone. I started with KLRD in October, so this is my very first session. I am working on healthcare topics, so I'm mostly focused on insurance here.
If you want to introduce both.
Sure. My name is Dennis Nicholson. I'm part of the AV team, as well as my coworker. This is Irshad Rather. There in the corner, we don't have enough seats, so he's sitting there, and he's also part of the AV team. Good to be here.
Great to have all of you. Let's see, do we have any of our staff online who would want to take a quick moment? Maybe Mr. Wu?
Sure. Hi, committee. My name is Stephen Wu. I am a fiscal analyst with Legislative Research. Of pertinence to this committee, I am our office's main contact for the CAPERS budget. I also staff Ways and Means over on the Senate side.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I would have missed with staff that are online? Okay, thanks. Really appreciate the team that makes all of the things happen, so that is great. Welcome to the committee to Representative Osman. Am I saying that correctly? And if you want to take just a moment and tell us something about yourself.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dan Osman. I represent District 48, that's in Overland Park, and I'm excited to be here. I'm an attorney by trade, and I'm just happy that that I get to participate on insurance and pensions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I should have been warned that I was putting 2 attorneys together over there. But no, welcome to committee. Representative Meyer online, if you would care to say hello to the committee for us.
Hi all, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Heather Meyer. My background is in social work, specifically medical social work, and I do have quite a bit of background working with insurance companies directly through that role. So thank you very much. Good afternoon, and it's great to be here.
Great, thank you, representatives. For the benefit of our new representatives, I thought it would be helpful for us to very quickly share something about ourselves, but I think we're going to try it differently. And you may hate me for this, but we'll see. I'd like you to talk for about 3 minutes with the person next to you and each decide something that both of you are comfortable sharing that we should know about that person on the committee. So you can pretend you're their campaign manager to share something really important about what they've accomplished. You can just share some interesting anecdote that folks might not know that we could get to learn. So we'll start if you just pair off through, and then you two, since you've already introduced yourself, we'll let you out, but that puts you two together. And I'll start about 3 minutes, and then we'll start around the table. Thanks.
Dan? Yes. I'm gonna let you talk to Ken here. I'm gonna be able to talk to you every day. So talk to him, and you'll have to talk about it. I'll talk about it.
Do you have anything exciting that's interesting that I should know about? Okay. Yes. That's not exciting whatsoever.
Now, do you practice?
Yep. So I do a lot of redevelopment work or affirmative action compliance. So a lot of contract compliance stuff. A lot of it's on the Missouri side, and like when a entity needs work with with the statutory agency, like this alphabet soup, TIP, PIEA, LTR. It's all like when you deal with government, it's like all alphabets. So I help them through the process. And it's just dealing with red tape, dealing with bureaucracy.
Are you two pairing up, or are you two pairing up?
Well, the three of us were.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, he's already talked about it.
Great.
I got a lot to say about it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry to get in your way. You
No,
guys are doing
you're
perfect.
good. You're good. Where do you go to law school?
Hey,
You go to high school?
Study Mission East.
East. You're a Prairie Village person. Yep. My son lives in Prairie Village. They are the most overpriced houses I have ever seen.
Yeah. We lived over the Missouri side in this 1950s tract housing, like $100,000 or so. You take that same house, transport it 3 miles this way, it's $350,000.
I know.
I looked at a house, and it was $100,000 range.
Yeah.
Then my nephew had one, and his wife lived there. Well, they used to live in Colorado. And that was a pretty small house. I mean, it was one, I don't know how much to pay for it.
The thing about Prairie Village, and I'm talking out of context, but to me, it used to probably be the rich part of Kansas City. And the richer part of Kansas City goes to February. So, I thought maybe you would think. I mean, they got the beautiful homes too.
What a lot of the times what they do in Prairie Village, buy the house, buy the plot of land, destroy it, and then build up a new house on it. So they paid $300,000 for just the plot of land because they build the new house on it.
Yeah, but the house now will cost you $300,000.
All right.
Yeah. No, I do my own consulting, so I work out of my house. Yeah. So I just have my clients, and I'm able to do everything I need to do.
How hard was it?
Okay, thank you, committee. Pushing 3.5, 4 minutes, and I may be interrupting one of our more productive discussions, so I apologize for that. But hopefully you got to learn a little bit about it. I'm just going to start around. I'll start with Vice Chair Croft. If you'll tell us a little about Representative Dodson. Target about a minute or so. Just something real quick will be great.
I'll be short. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, to my left is Representative Mike Dodson, retired Lieutenant General from the Army, 37 years, worked 12 years after the Army at Bechtel. And then, but if you're ever questioning about moving, he's moved 26 times in the military, so he's got it down pat.
Actually, if you talk to my family, it's my wife who's moved 26 times. We had the luxury of me going off to the job and her policing up the household goods and the kids. So I'm sitting next to Chris Croft. Chris is, you know, when you look around the Army, what you find is the strength of the Army is in two places. It's in our colonels and in our great NCOs. And our colonels are what make the Army run, and I'm sitting next to one of the greats. Came out of Leavenworth, did a little work for graduate school for a while, and now is here with us. He also has moved a lot. He's moved 16 times, and he's been married for 36 years, and he has his grandkids. You don't know it to look at him. One of them is a teenager already. And he's done obviously great things here in the legislature for us, and you'll notice that by him doing some leadership work around for all of us.
Yes, thank you. Stephen Howe is in his second term. Is that correct? Second year of his first term. He distinguishes himself as being a guy that lives on 5 hours of sleep a night, not by choice, but by 5 kids. So, and all of those at an age that are young enough to tend to. He's, I believe, a Kansas native, and he's has the distinguishment of having been an intern and then an employee in DC for Senator Moran and Slattery. For Hewell's Camp. Okay, Hewell's Camp. Okay, and so yep, and a good man to have in a couple of committees together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the privilege of introducing Representative Amel Bergquist to my right, and he is the proud grandfather of 22 grandchildren, and so he's been very blessed in that way. He has over 20 years of public service. He has been served as a mayor and on the city council, and now is bringing that expertise here to the State House. And so, and also a mighty fine singer. He's blessed us in the House chamber several times. So, thank you.
Thank you. To my left is Representative Bill Riley. He represents the 80th House District, which is south of Wichita. He's a retired teacher and owns a bed and breakfast that he's had for 17 years, which is 2 miles south of Wellington. So if you get that way, be sure to visit. So.
And to my right is one of your hometown Topeka people. We were visiting that he represents the southwest part of Topeka. His background, small business, and sounds like restaurant business, right? Or no,
retail.
Retail business.
Yeah.
And so how they do that and do this, I don't know. I was trying to figure out that maybe his retail business, he just did part-time. Busy guy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my left is Representative Pat Proctor, one of those people who ran the Army. He's a retired colonel, 25 years in the military. He's a classic car buff. He likes to restore all kinds of classic cars, and his district is the 41st, which is Leavenworth, including Fort Leavenworth. And I might share that may be the place that has the largest garage sale in the state once a year.
We're all about economic development at Leavenworth. So I have the honor of introducing Representative Randy Garber, who was a 20-year Navy veteran. I did not know that about him, and aviation tech, and he was an NCO, so he worked for a living, unlike us colonels. So he represents the 62nd District, which is north of Topeka, and something you might not know about him, he's got 5 kids and 13 grandkids, 2 of which are married, so he might be a great-grandpa before you know it.
Hello. I have the great privilege of introducing Chuck Smith, and he is in an adjoining district to mine. I'm in the 2nd district, he's the 3rd, And he's a very famous person down in our part of the state because he's the retired coach of the high school coach of St. Mary's Colgan football team. And how many state championships have you won? 5. And so he knows how to win football games. He also, it must be genetic because several of his sons have played at Pitt State and really distinguishing themselves there. And one of his sons, Mark, is now a coach at Frontenac High School, which is in my district, and just really, really proud of them as well as the other teams that I represent in my district. And like I say, Coach Smith's just all around great guy. And if you don't know him, I encourage you to get to know him.
Collins, lives in Mulberry, went to Girard High School, retired from AT&T, is an entrepreneur. He owns a convenient mart in Mulberry, just opened it. He's going to open a laundromat along with it. And like you say, I really have enjoyed getting to know Ken and being next door to each other. We've become good friends, and he really does a nice job. And then Daniel here, I'm not even going to say his last name. I'd butcher it, so I'm not going to say it. And the kid might add a little bit, but he's a lawyer, KU Law School, is self-employed, works from home, went to Shawnee Mission East. And as soon as I heard that, I said, hey, that's Prairie Village. I got a son that lives in Prairie Village, and it's the most overpriced houses I've ever seen. The bedrooms are so small. I have 7 children, so I can't imagine a bedroom so small. So, but it's great to have Dan here, and like I say, a pleasure to know both these guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the privilege of telling you a little bit about a lady that has something in common with me, and that Representative Neighbor and I are 2 of the 3 members of the legislature that have served as a freshman 3 times. That's kind of good and bad. She represents a district in Johnson County. You will learn soon enough on this committee she's a very proud mother, because every time she gets a chance to mention it, she'll mention she's the mother of a doctor among her 4 children, one of whom lives in Amsterdam, another of whom is on the causeway to Key West as a pitmaster. So yeah, if you travel around, stop at the bed and breakfast, then you can head on down to Key West and catch some barbecue. She has been on the insurance committee every year she's been in the legislature, and most of those years she was the only, sad to say, female on the committee. It's good now that we have 3 females on the committee, which segues in, if I may take a moment, she's not here, but there is some very exciting news to share with the committee about Representative Finney, in that she has waited for 3 years for a new kidney, and she now has one.
Well, I was going to introduce Gail Finney, but the man with all the power did that before me, so I thank him for doing that. I have the greatest respect for the gentleman sitting to my right. I have learned a great deal over his 3 different terms in the House and Senate, both. Actually, he is probably one of only 3 legislators that has served all in the Senate and in the House for the longest time, and he came in 1978. So he's been in both the House and the Senate. He has chosen the house as his favorite, but I won't tell him that. Actually, his first 7 years, he was taught in a one-room schoolhouse. For 12 years, he had no running water in his home. So I would say he's very special. He was also the Jackson County, Kansas spelling champ. Do not misspell any words in your briefs. So thank you, Representative Miller.
Thank you, committee. I appreciate learning a little more about.
May I add one thing? I know we have a person, and I forgot to tell my gentleman over here, I have moved 25 times. So you have me beat by 1 year. And I know what it's like being in the military.
All right, thanks again, committee. I appreciate it. I basically learned that I'm a slacker, which is great, but fun to learn everything that you have done. And I farm and work with numbers, and that's it. And I'll look forward to working with you through the session. That'll bring us to our next topic, which is a chance to get some information from KPERS. I'll turn it over to our executive director from KPERS, and something you may or may not know about Alan. Aside from doing an exceptional job of directing KPERS and working to make it a great place for people to work, annually, I believe they have a chili cook-off. I don't know if that got stopped during COVID, and you have won that chili cook-off how many times?
Well, not to brag, but at least 3 times.
And you've been the director at KPERS how long?
Yeah, a little more than 3 years, but 10 years.
And is it at all related to your position that you win, or is it the chili?
The judges, it's supposed to be a blind judge kind of thing, but sometimes they just need a little help realizing which crock pot to go for. So.
Thank you, and thank you for being with committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is a pleasure to be here. And if I just may take a moment, we are lucky today to have one of our trustees, Trustee Brad Stratton, who is an appointee of the governor and is from Overland Park, and is on the school board of Shawnee Mission School Board as well, besides serving on the KPERS board, so we welcome him. And even though I get to stand here at the microphone quite a bit, Jared Waltner, right here in the front row, is our planning and research officer and is my go-to person in terms of information and helping me prepare testimony. So if you ever need to get a hold of somebody of KPERS, certainly if I happen to not be at my desk, out working the crowd on the chili front, Jared would be the person that could help you as well. So certainly pleased to be here. The chair had asked us to just touch on 3 brief topics this morning, and I guess like a bad penny, I'll probably be back more than once this session to share additional information as appropriate. Just as a reminder, on page 2 there is just, KPERS is a big system, touches a lot of lives, over 300,000 members, 100,000 retirees, about 155,000 active members. And of course, there's the state, school, local system, the judges' retirement system, and the police and fire, the public safety retirement system. We interact with 1,500 employers. So of course the state, all the school districts, all the counties, all the community colleges, almost all the cities. There's a few, for example, the city of Wichita is large enough to have their own retirement system. But most of the cities, and then you get into townships and drainage districts and fire protection service districts. There's about 1,500 of those. So lots of interaction. On slide 3 is just the Board of Trustees. You may know we have 9 trustees, and they all, of course, have that fiduciary responsibility, which they take very seriously. And of course, in the pension world, that fiduciary responsibility is just, of course, to do the highest ethical, moral, legal, that responsibility to do what's best for the members. And you can see the 9 members, 4 appointed by the governor, 1 by the Speaker of the House, 1 by the President of the Senate. 2 of the members are elected, and then the state treasurer is on by virtue of the office. Trustee, the very last one, Joe Yoon, is our newest trustee from Prairie Village. She works for the Reach Healthcare Foundation there, and she is a recent appointee by the governor. On slide 4 then, or just get you to the specific charge by the chair today, talk about Capers investment returns, and I'm sure glad he asked that one. Sometimes the numbers aren't so good, but today I'm going to share some very good numbers with you. How we're doing on pension funding bonds, good news there, and then talk a little bit about the Capers investment return assumption, which is one of those actuarial kinds of things. On slide 5 then, looks at that investment experience, and investment experience is important because over half of the money that comes into the trust fund is off those investment earnings. About a third is from those employer contributions, and then the balance comes from the members. And so as we look at calendar year 2020 returns, which was the last year that then the most recent valuation is based on, it was 11.5%. But the fiscal year that just ended, so last June, we had a 26.3% rate of return. And I wish I could say we would have that every year, but probably the odds are against that we're going to be able to churn out 26%, although our trustees give good guidance on our investments, and we might be headed that way, but for fiscal year 21, 26.33%. And then for calendar year 2021, and we haven't closed all the books on that, through the end of November, we were at 13.6, but it looks like we might, in terms of ending November, there was a little downturn. December, there were strong returns, and so we're going to probably end up certainly in the 15% range, maybe a little bit higher for the rate of return for calendar year 2021, which is then the data then that the actuary uses to calculate that annual actuarial valuation. You can see that graph on the right, that time-weighted return, so that there's that 26.3% to 1 year, and you can see 3 years, 11%, 5-year, 10-year, and that 25-year average return of 8%. And that's important, of course, as a large institutional investor that has that long institutional investment horizon of 30, 40, 50 years. That 25 years is a good marker, and that dotted line going across there, that's that assumed rate of return of 7.75%, and in this measurement, we've exceeded that since that time. But as you also know on slide 6, the market goes up, the market goes down, and so if you look at the fiscal year, this is historical fiscal year returns, you see that 26.3% on the far right. And some of you may remember 2008, 2009 was not such a good year in terms of the market. The Capers Trust Fund took a hit that year. In 2009, it was down almost 20%. Of course, 2001, 2002 was another downturn there where it was actually negative. And again, you see that dotted line going across, that's that 7.75 assumed rate of return. So again, not that we're, we aren't day traders, but we certainly watch the market, but we also have that, again, that comfort level of we're looking out 40 or 50 years. So there might be lots of ups and downs in a year, but we're in for the long haul and we've got that long investment horizon. Slide 7 just looks at, this is through November, so that rolling 1 year average, and of course, all these percentages, the measurement time period certainly is a factor, but in that case, looking back the last 12 months since the end of November, 16.6%, 12.7, 3 years, 11% at 5, and then 25 years, at 7.9%. But all very strong returns, which helps in the funding position of Capers. And speaking of the funding position of Capers, pension funding bonds. Some of you that were here last year may remember the legislature, or at least a majority of you, approved the approval to sell $500 million in pension obligation bonds. And they're 30-year bonds, and they're just interest arbitrage bonds. The state sells the bonds. The state has to pay the debt service. Capers' only part in it is we get the proceeds from the bond sale. So we got $500 million. So it was a great day to come to work that day. We get this wire transfer. The trust fund just went up $500 million. So that was a good thing. But in August, those bonds were sold, and they sold at a rate of 2.65%. And so, which is, certainly a very favorable rate. So in these bonds, then that marker is, the assumption is that over 30 years, the Capers Trust Fund has to at least earn more than 2.65% to make it, a good financial decision for the state to do. And I would hope over 30 years, if the trust fund is not earning more than 2.65%, then there might be other problems to deal with. But that's the hurdle for these bonds. And so that money came into the trust fund. It's projected to improve that funded ratio, assets to liabilities, by about 2.3%. So that's a good thing. The debt service, on your side then, that annual debt service that the state will pay is about $24 million a year, and presumably that'll probably come out of the state general fund. So that's the latest bonds. Of course, you may know there were 2 other bond issuances to help the funding position of Capers. One was in 2004. It started out as $500 million as well. There was some interest crediting kind of thing where interest helped pay those early years. But anyway, we ended up with $440 million was the net proceeds, and those bonds sold for 5.39%. Annual debt service is about $33 million, comes from the lottery, the expanded lottery money, which is the casino money. Then in 2015, the state sold $1 billion in bonds with a B. Those bonds sold at 4.69%. That was in August of 2015, and the annual debt service there is $65 million. So So how have we done on those bonds? As you look on slide 10, on those 2004 bonds, so on that $440 million that we received, so the debt service is 5.39%. We've earned 8.06%. So if you kind of look at the whole picture of the state's position, Capers, so if you take out the debt service, the money that Capers has earned, then those bonds are good. We got $440 million, and we've earned, timing's everything, we've earned $624 million. Got 440, we've earned 624 million at this point. Again, they're 30-year bonds. It could change next year or the year after that. But certainly, so costing 5.39, we've earned over 8%. And then as you look at the $1 billion in bonds, 2015, way shorter time frame, but those sold at 4.69%. Since then, we've earned 9.5%. So again, you take out the debt service payment, the net position positive to the state so far is $436 million. So you look at on slide 11 and kind of just summarizes, but again, just remind you of 30-year bonds. But between those 2 bonds, currently, we're to the good $1 billion of earnings of that money we were able to get into the trust fund, invest it, state pays the debt service, and then the net position is still a positive $1 billion. Again, doesn't guarantee that it's going to stay there, but certainly, and you look over those last 25 years where Capers has earned almost 8%, that helps when you look at that interest arbitrage. Is the trust fund able to beat whatever the debt service? So, interest arbitrage bonds, and that's all they are. I mean, it's not a fancy investment mechanism. It just means you're going to pay the debt service, you're going to sell them for a certain rate, and the assumption is we'll be able to outperform that cost of the bonds. Then the third topic the chair had asked me to visit about is the investment return assumption. Investment return assumption just is, we have this annual actuarial evaluation that measures assets and liabilities, and so then that's the measure then to, estimate the costs and establish those employer contributions then to fund the plan. And so there's lots of assumptions that go in to that point. I'm sorry.
And thank you, Director Conray. I might stop. We kind of have, that first part is kind of packaged in investment return assumptions and what's happened and kind of where we are. And then this part would take us a little more to just give us a heads up on where we may be going. So I'd say we kind of have facts and figures from that first one. And now we're dealing with some assumptions that will get us into the planning mode. And before we shift gears, I thought I'd see if anybody had any questions or anything they wanted to clarify. Representative Riley.
Yes, good presentation, good slides. Could you update slide number 6 and I think slide number 11 and make it those 30-year, since everything we're talking in bonds, take it back to 1993 and bring that back to me. And also, I think it was slide 11 where you just brought out and you talked about, was 25 years, over the last 25 years. If we're talking 30 years, let's talk 30 years. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We can do that with Jared's help. We can generate that. Absolutely, yes, no problem. I mean, it's available and we'll do it for you. Yep.
Thank you. Representative Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curious, what is the remaining unfunded liability?
For state school, it's about $6 billion with a B. 6 billion, yeah.
So along that line, if there's $6 billion on the state school group, which is the main one we're focused on, the overall debt to the system, do you have that figure roughly? The overall debt that we would have, and of course I imagine some of it's local. And
that's right. We're a little over 8 billion, I believe, in total system, and that'd be local and police and fire and judges and all the whole works.
But the main funding one we look at, to Representative Croft's question, is $6 billion. It's been good to whittle it down to that. And then, so thank you. Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. On the top of slide 5, it says calendar year 2020 returns total 11.5. Then when you go to the slide 6, towards the end there, I'm trying to figure out where the 11.5 went.
Right.
The 26 shows up, and I know there's a difference between calendar and fiscal, but it would seem to have been reconciled within 2 years. So
yes, and that's a good observation, and you're certainly right. And it really just comes down to, again, sort of the timing in terms of the volatility, particularly in the last 12 to 24 months. So depending on which 12 months whether it's a calendar year or the fiscal year, there have certainly been some downturns in some months, some pretty, 2 or 3% down. But then there's been several months of, so it is just a timing thing, whether it's a calendar year or the fiscal year. But that's a very good point.
Thank you.
So I think that's a very important question, Representative Dodson, in that I've been nervous about folks looking at that 26.3, because if you had a 12-month return from the trough of either May to May or June to June, those numbers are huge. And it was much different by the time we got to December. So those pieces, and that's why it's really challenging to look at, okay, and I asked Alan all kinds of questions because I want to know where we are now. And that's even tougher. So now I've got you looking at our fiscal year returns, which are published and looked at in the actuarial report, our calendar year returns, which we use to measure things like any excess dividend that is paid on the Tier 3. And now the other returns go through November. So you've got, and anyway, so all of those numbers then become a little hard to parse, but give us a chance to get a handle on where we've been over the last year. And I do appreciate having those 25-year numbers from a couple of different measures. And I do like to see the 25-year numbers true up, and that goes to 8% and 7.9. To Bill's question on the long term. So again, exactly where we start, even the 25-year number is slightly different. And oftentimes by 25 years, we've had a chance to average it out. But appreciate your attention to those details. Other questions by members of the committee? Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Conroy, for this briefing. It's been very useful for me to help me dust off the cobwebs from last session. I need some more help brushing away cobwebs here. If I remember correctly from the last session, there's a certain amount of unfunded liability that you expect that just based on the growth of the investments, we would be okay with. We think that we'd be able to meet that that obligation when it comes up? What is that number and how far off are we from it now?
Right. Well, that unfunded liability number for state school is that $5 billion. And the current amortization period or paying the debt, we're down to about 12 years. So as that window gets smaller, most of that unfunded liability then will be extinguished under the current assumptions then by the end of 2033, 2034. And so that'll continue to decrease, assuming all the assumptions are met, assuming the 775, assuming the employer contributions come in. And so, again, currently where we stand, 2033, 2034 would be a great year to be in the legislature because that employer contributions, if everything stays on schedule, what the state pays will drop. I used to think $1 billion was a lot of money, but maybe it's not anymore. I don't know. Yeah.
Just to clarify, I know you were in the middle of the conversation there. So is it $5 billion or $6 billion deficit on the school?
The state schools, I think at $5 billion. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Misspoke if I did. Yep. Sorry.
And has it kind of come down from 6 billion with the 500 mil?
Yes, that's right.
Those pieces. So
Yes.
we've seen that change between investment return.
Strong investment return.
Right.
And then as we project out now the receipt of the $500 million for the
Yeah.
$500 million of pension obligation bonds.
So 15% return on 20-some billion dollars would give us about 400 million in return. 500 from the bond is where that helps to buy us down. And what is our balance in the trust fund now? Is it?
We're over $26 billion, again with the B. So
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? I want to hang on to Representative Proctor's question for just come back to that in just a bit. But at 26 billion, it's also useful to remember that Trustee Stratton and others, when they make a small position of the portfolio, I'd say 1% is a small position. Do I often have less than 1% positions? Some? Yeah. So even at 1%, that's still 260 million that they're putting to work at a single decision point. So they are big numbers at work for the state and the employees. I'd also flash back briefly to the bond piece. I think it was clear, but as we went through and the way that you'd stated it was good, we got the money on the 2004 C bond, and we are ahead by 624, and we're ahead by 624 in addition to the debt service fully paid, but that debt service just gets us to zero. And it's that debt service of 33 million a year that's paid in addition to the 624. There's the total dollars out, and that then is our net positive for the transaction to date. And again, that could be a smaller number next year, depending on returns in the markets, et cetera, but appreciate the snapshot of where we are.
yeah, and you make a good point there. So there is all this debt now there's these 3 bond issues being paid by the state. So there's that 33 million on the first one, the 65 million on the second one, and now 24 million on the third one. So when we give reports on what's the state's employer contributions for state and school members, that debt service isn't in the CAPER's wheelhouse. It's in the debt service of the state of Kansas over in the Department of Administration's budget. But so, roughly there's about another 125 million now a year that the state's paying to really help fund CAPER's. It's an important point, I believe.
So thank you for that. And just for us to keep in mind, there is that payment that is going in addition to the other payments to meet that liability. And as excited as I am about getting to 5 billion in unfunded liability, I still have the debt on the books. It didn't disappear, although I put 500 million in. So another measure would be the net remaining on those bond issues as we think of the debt that we continue to face on that liability. But thank you for walking through this. So Representative Proctor's question got to some of how we looked forward and our topic about the investment return and how this unfunded liability is extinguished. And if there were no further questions on where we were, if you'd continue to lead us through some of the discussions that are going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on slide 12, again, there's lots of assumptions in that the Board of Trustees deals with. You know, they all go into that actuarial evaluation, again, as I was saying, measures assets and liabilities, and that's then used to estimate benefit costs and employer contributions. And so that valuation is done every year, but probably one of the key one, maybe the largest one, would be that investment return assumption, because so whatever that is, and it's currently 775, the assumption is when the actuary does all of her projections, so you have $26 billion, and you're going to project that out over 30, 40, or 50 years, how much is that going to earn? Well, from an actuarial standpoint, the assumption currently being used is over that 50 years, it's going to return 7.75%. Last 25 years, it's been fine. It's been, let's say, 8%. But what does, you know, so is that a good number as we look out for the next 30 or 40 or 50 years? So the Board of Trustees have started that review. And of course, if that return assumption is lowered, that means there's going to be less money coming in on the investment side, which increases then the liabilities. And guess who then, you know, in terms of KPERS funding, three sources: investment income, employee contributions, and then the third one is, and it's the plug factor, and that's employer contributions. Less money that comes in on the investment side or assumed to come in, then it's got to be made up or shored up by employer contributions. Slide 13 then is just back in 1998, the legislature delegated that authority to the Board of Trustees to set that return assumption. And it's currently, as we've talked about, the 7.775, and that's what the board has decided upon. And they lowered that in 2016. It was at 8%. And that was since 1986. So it was a long run at 8%. In 2016, it was revised down to 7.75%. And most of the, I'll tell you, most of the public pension plans have are using a lower rate than 7.75. We're in a pretty select group right now. I think there's about 130 statewide public pension plan, because some states like Missouri has their own state employee plan, and they have their own school plan, and then they have their own local employee plan. But so you get to 130 that way. But I think there's only two plans. KPERS is one of them that's at 7.75 or higher. There's one plan that's still at 8. And why is that important? Because again, that assumed rate of return, if you're worried about intergenerational equity, because if you get it wrong, if you set that rate too high, then that pushes costs to the future generation. Same way if you push it, if it's not high enough and it's too low, then you're pushing costs, you know, on the current generation. So you want to get a rate that balances that intergenerational equity, is what they call it. So 7.75, the board has started a good discussion, a vigorous discussion, gathering lots of information. They last reviewed it specifically in 2019, decided not to change it then, but the KPERS general investment consultant and as their 10-year expected investment return back then was 7.1%, and now it's 6%. And of course, that's 10-year. An actuarial assumption, again, you know, it's that longer one. They don't have to marry up, but they should be kind of in the ballpark of each other. And so as I guess the investment consultant world, they have pulled that down, and it's currently at 6%. So the board's currently examining it. They've discussed it at a couple meetings. They're going to continue to discuss it at their January meeting, so they're still gathering information, and I'm sure they'll continue their discussion and have a decision at some point. But it is important, I think, for you all to be aware that that discussion's going on, and should it be lowered, as the chair has indicated, that will impact then the liabilities, funded ratio, that unfunded actuarial liability within the trust fund.
So thank you, Director, and that should be perfectly clear. Everybody has that down, right? So, Representative Bergquist?
After any questions, I just have a comment.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? So, Representative Dodson.
Yeah, we've got 7.75, and that, as you know, had come from a long time after 8.0. And then on this slide 14, we've got 7.1, and I don't know where the 7.1 came from. I mean, that didn't show up in any previous slide. And then that estimate went down to 6.0. And, you know, I've talked to a few guys who are kind of in the brokerage business and so on, and your slide back on slide 7 kind of shows the long-term returns. And if you look at the stock market from, let's just say, 1965 forward, the slant seems to be pretty favorable. And then the comment that's on the bottom of slide 12, which is a lower investment return assumption means the system's assets are expected to earn less investment income in the future, which increases the present value of future benefits, that is liabilities. So are we doing something more than forecasting here? I mean, is there something to be gained by changing our look at these liabilities, which is that sentence I just read?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, again, it's trying to get that rate as best, you know, I guess the experts, consultants, what the Board of Trustees decide, again, to get it at a rate so current people aren't paying too much or too little in terms of contributions. And so it's that, again, that intergenerational equity, and it's just a guess, and it's periodically reviewed, as mentioned here, and it's reviewed every, 3 to 5 years by the board, and so they'll adjust that. But don't forget, too, the Capers Trust Fund, being a large institutional investment, we have about just a quarter of the equity, or in U.S. equities, about a quarter in international equities. And then the balance are in other things, corporate debt, or certificates, bonds, timber, real estate, and on alternative investments on down the list. So even though the market is doing very well now, as we're trying to minimize risk, and so when it goes the other way, we aren't all in, let's say, U.S. equities. So we're trying to, again, have that balanced portfolio which minimize risk as that market goes those ups and downs. If that's
appreciate that. I mean, the number just seemed very significant to me, to drop it from 7.1 to 6.
Right, and that's just the 10-year look by our investment consultant. But that's what, as they study their world, they think that's the direction it's headed.
Just based on what you said, if I have just one more moment here. Do we have statutory restrictions on kind of that investment policy that causes us to go in that direction?
There are statutory limitations on what the trust fund can be invested in, no more than 60% in equities, no more than 15% in alternative investments. The alternative investments can't increase more than 5%. And so there is a statutory framework that limits what the Board of Trustees can allocate funds to.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. I really like how you framed it in terms of, if the number's too high, you're potentially putting the burden on future generations if it's too low. But really, that's the employer contribution that we're talking about, right? So whether it's the state, the municipality, they're the ones that are that payer, right?
That's correct. It falls to the employer to pay it. The employee contributions are set by statute, but that's right. It falls to the employer. You're correct.
And so if I could follow up, Mr. Chairman, I'm hearing a lot from my constituents about property taxes and sales taxes, and that money, a chunk of it's going towards this. So could you explain to me, and I'm understanding the limits of my capability, could you explain to me how that number's arrived at for those expected returns? Is it actuarially done and then recommended to the trustees? Do the trustees come with the number? How is that done?
And your turn on that assumed rate of return? Yeah, that's right. I mean, the actuary provides information. Our general investment consultant provides recommendation. Staff has input as well. We again, look at, what's going on in the pension world, but so much of it does come down to what our portfolio looks like. But anyway, so it's the three consultants, or particularly the two consultants, the general investment consultant, the actuary, based on their experience, and both of those work with a lot of other public pension plans. And so they provide recommendations then to the Board of Trustees. It's ultimately, of course, their decision.
Representative Miller and then Riley.
Mr. Conroy, as you're aware, we've been enjoying as a state some economic good times, which opens up a lot of opportunity for us to do things. Some are suggesting we take a certain amount of money. I saw one figure of $1 billion of that good times and use it to pay down the unfunded liability. Will you explain, I know you can explain it, but in a way that I can understand or later articulate it, if we were to do that, what the implications are to retirees in the system, people currently paying in the system, and ordinary everyday taxpayers, if there are implications on those three groups. Because I think when people see that proposal, they may be misinformed as the actual impact on them as a member of each of those three groups. Do you understand my question?
I believe so.
Thank you.
Give it a shot. So I guess probably the tax or retirees and active people, I guess just overall, the stronger the trust fund is, the stronger funded position KPERS finds itself in, then it just increases the chance, and not that I'm ever worried about it, but in terms of honoring the obligation that's been made to those public servants that have provided those services.
But it will not affect my check.
It will not. And with the proposal, for example, $1 billion, since you mentioned it, it would increase that funded ratio, assets to liabilities. It'd get it over 80%. And of course, you really want to be at 100%. You want to be totally funded. But sort of the last big hurdle to get over is that 80% one. You know, if you can get over 80%, so whenever the market downturn comes, and we know one of these days it is going to come, it's not, you know, if it's going to come, it's when it's going to come. The stronger you can make the system, if we have another 2008, 2009, you know, you can take that maybe a 20% downturn in the market in one year, which happened then. And the funded ratio back in 2012, after that you know, the funded ratio got down to 56%. It's a low point, and you have to be careful because so you have one big downturn and then maybe 2 years later you have another big downturn, that funded ratio would continue to get pulled down, and at some point you just can't invest your way out, and there's got to be something else done. So the stronger the system is, I think the better it is for the funded position is, the better it is for retirees and then also active people as well. On the taxpayer side then, so you give KPERS, or the state would give KPERS $1 billion, funded ratio goes up 4%. The employer contribution, what the state's paying for all state employees and all school district employees as part of state aid education, that would go down from currently about 13% to a little over 11%. And that translates into about $75 million less, and that's all funds, a year that the state would have to pay. So over 4 years of those lower employer contributions, and of course that assumes all 4 years, then we meet the 775, the demographics are the same, all the assumptions are made, that would save about $400 million in state employer contributions to the trust fund over those 5 years, but about 75, 80 million a year that would, because the employer contribution rate's down, the dollars coming in from that would be less. So that would be an advantage to the taxpayers, again, competing against a lot of other interests and places where that money could go. But I think that'd be retirees active, stronger system, taxpayers, it'd be less that the state would have to put in the future because, of course, they're sort of pre-funding, putting in $1 billion. That unfunded liability would go from about $5 billion to $4 billion, just like that.
If I may, so while we can't be clairvoyant, we can make educated predictions, and based on history, we were better off borrowing money last year than we were paying it or spending it.
Last year it was at 2.65%. That's, I guess, I think certainly a pretty reasonable rate.
And thank you for that. And one last comment, Mr. Chairman, coming from a very conservative background, that's hard for me to swallow, but having swallowed it, it digested well. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for digesting it. And actually, I am very excited about that rate. And I would also like to thank my colleague, Representative Miller, who was one of the first last session to encourage me to look at whether bonding might make sense. So I appreciated that. Representative Riley.
And then you throw a third dimension in that the 25% that you return was during a period of 2% inflation. And here we are rolling into something like a 7% inflation, and you're trying to make 7.5. So there's another third dimension to all of that, is what the value of money is. So with inflation and deflation.
Correct, and you make a good point, that's right. Is that where we end up on the current trajectory on inflation certainly will also be a factor. It's a good point.
So a couple of thoughts that I had. You'd mentioned some of the constraints on the portfolio in response to Representative Dodson's question, and I had forgotten the 60% in equities. Is that something we ever bump up against, particularly in this interest rate environment that we've had concern on?
No, I don't believe it's been an issue.
Or if there are any other constraints that are of a concern, something we would like to hear from, and we appreciate the board's work to figure out that portfolio and want to make sure that as markets and various assumptions change, that we're not going to change those wildly, but we want to be appropriately dynamic with the type of things that are there. And thanks for bringing those on alternative investments to us in the past. So let's see. Also appreciated the question on how that debt service would change. Should we put $1 billion in, it sounded like our payment would go down in the neighborhood of 80 million per year.
Yes, it starts out a little less than that, and then of course as the payroll goes up, it goes over 80.
Continues.
It's in the neighborhood of that, yes.
Thanks. My back of the envelope calculation wasn't, I was running out of space, so I appreciated you having that done.
A lot of zeros.
Yeah. The other thing, as we look to the return assumption versus what we're looking at, and by the way, if we use 26% as the return assumption, would we be able to stop contributing?
It would open up lots of
and
possibilities.
do every
I can tell
change you
that,
would
yeah.
like, knowing that's not realistic, and knowing that inflation and raises in interest rates will make future returns more challenging. Is there a benchmark for each 0.25% we reduce the return assumption, the impact on the unfunded liability?
If I remember right, every time you pull down that 0.25% in terms of that unfunded liability, it adds, so a quarter, 7.75, 7.5, bumps up the unfunded liability at half, $500 million, $500 million. So if that goes down, that unfunded liability is going to go up accordingly. So in rough terms, yes.
So thank you. And that's the thing that I wanted us to just start to get our head around. Is should they talk about a number lower than 7 3/4, how do we continue to monitor our progress on that change in the unfunded liability? To the other question, putting cash in works great. Bonding, the debt's still out there. So I want to continue to recognize that the debt's still out there and appreciate that so far we've gotten a positive arbitrage on that. But that works well. To Representative Proctor's point, it is a big chunk of taxes that do go for this. And I want us all to continue to take a good look at how we get the right one and how we get there over time. Because the reality is the goal is that we're putting in the right payment, that we're putting in enough, not overcharging taxpayers, et cetera. As we look back, the payments were materially smaller not all that long ago. And I want to make sure that we get that spread correct and continue to take those 30-year timeframes as we look at it. But should we have a meaningful change in that, I think it also begs the question of amortization. And I think as you get closer to that time, you'll give us more of a heads up of how that looks and how we might try to address a big change in the liability at a point in time. We're set to address the liability as it exists over time, and I have resisted changing how we looked at the same liability. When we change that liability, we put a lot more variables in play as we try to figure out how to best fund that equitably over generations. So this could be one of the larger variables that we have in planning budgets, and certainly the CAPERS thing. And I just wanted it to be on our radar screen as it'll be discussed at which meetings of the board?
They're going to meet next week, and so it'll be one of the discussion items for their January meeting a week from Friday.
Great, thank you. Other questions, committee? Yes, Representative Bergquist.
To those of you who are thank you, Mr. Chair. To those of you who are new to this committee, just an incidental note, since we didn't have any comments about the chair. If there's ever any doubt about the significance of a particular figure, you might listen to the dialogue between the chair and the conferee. And we have so many points of expertise in this room that I really appreciate. But and the other one is simply that if you wonder if numbers can be fun, just look at the chair's face.
Thank you for sharing my enthusiasm. So with that, thank you, and thank you, Director Conroy. So seeing someone who is here, I might indulge the committee for a quick change in the direction before jumping to our Insurance Commission, and that would be bill introductions. And I would ask if anyone has bill introductions and would recognize Mr. Klump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. We have a bill introduction. This is on behalf of the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Sheriff's Association, and Kansas Peace Officers Association. It is a pension bill. The RS number is 22 RS 2446. This relates to pensions, and it relates to the purchase of previous service time. And what it fixes is there are different rules today in the CAPERS system than there are in the KP&F system, the KP&F system being much more restrictive, and this would make those equal. It would create equity between the two systems.
Thank you. Are there any questions, committee? Is there an objection? Without objection, the bill will be introduced in committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there other bill introductions? Seeing none, thank you. We will have those again in a week. We will now shift to our other key focus in the committee, and that is what we get to do with insurance, and we would welcome again our Commissioner of Insurance to the committee. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. What an honor to be with you today. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you and address you. I don't have a PowerPoint, and just consider this a state of the insurance department, and it will not last 50 minutes. So just to put you at ease. Today I have with me Lee Modisette. I think most of you know him. If you don't, you will know him. He is the Director of Communications and Government Affairs for us, and we're very fortunate to have him. Colleen, welcome. Your first committee meeting, I think, and I'm going to be honored to be in the minutes of that. You have a really tough job to do, so good luck. It's great to be back at the Capitol and see so many of my friends. I was here yesterday for the State of the Judiciary. Why I have trouble rolling that off, I don't know, and the State of the State, and so it's a pleasure to be back here again. I want you to know that I do appreciate your service to the state of Kansas. You've got some long hours ahead of you, and I know as the session proceeds, the work gets a little more difficult. So in advance, I thank you and your families for sharing you with the citizens of the state of Kansas during this time. The department was established in 1871, and no, I wasn't there, but it was established, and we celebrated our 150th year last year. And while we had hoped to have a different type of celebration, we're pleased with the celebration we had, and it was a good year for us. We celebrated at the State Fair with the rolling out and the unveiling of a new department seal. Each one of you have been handed or at your desk is our new what do we call these, challenge coin, and the challenge coin has the new seal on the front of it, and on the back of it, it has the badge of the Securities Commission on it. And so we've also given those to staff, and we want you to know it's a small token of our appreciation, and I think they're really lovely, and I hope you agree. And thank you to Lee for passing those out. So Kansas is a member of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. It's how we have the organizational structure for state-based regulation, so that's really important to me, and I think it's important to most Kansans. Accreditation occurs every 5 years. It's how the state maintains its ability to have that regulatory authority over our domestics, and that also gives us assurance for other states that have domestic companies and how they're regulated. You've heard a lot about accreditation in the past. We've come before this committee many times and have asked for certain bills to be passed to help us through that accreditation process. Sometimes you ask, why are we doing this? It doesn't really apply to us. Well, it applies to us because we have to get through accreditation. I'm not going to lie. They spent a week with us in November. A whole team of people did at the office. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. No pun intended, but I baked breakfast every morning before they got there, and took hot treats to them, muffins, breads, anything I could think of. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they had hot chocolate chip cookies. Those of you that are old enough to have flown on Midwest know that they used to make the cookies in the airplane and bake them. Our office smelled great, and the chocolate chips were really gooey, and we passed accreditation. So. We got a full accreditation for the 5 years. We're very excited about that, and we actually received a couple of kudos along the way. It's something that I've been working on since I took office, and it was a great day for the department and certainly a morale booster for our employees. And we were very excited. And we actually have a trophy, accreditation trophy that we have at the office now that they sent to us. So we're pretty excited about that. As of look at the clock, maybe 30 hours ago, we have completed our conversion to the National Insurance Producer Registry, also known as NIPR. Thank you to all of you who voted for Senate Bill 37 last year. That was the accreditation process. We did phase 1 in July 1st, and we completed the last piece of that yesterday. It's going very smoothly. We still have a team on site to work through some of the things, but we are, I won't give the last name, but we had an individual with the first name of Bailey was the first one to make it through the system yesterday. It was like birthing. It was a great day. It was fantastic. Sorry, Cindy, you know what I'm talking about, Representative Neighbor. Anyway, it was great. We flipped the switch on it and everything went well. I look forward to the efficiencies that it will bring to the department, and it is a positive change for the industry, and it's positive not only in functionality, but also financially. And it will eliminate many of our paper processes, if not all of them. The online system is very user-friendly, and we look forward to that. And a big bonus, but for me, but not for the United States Postal Service, we will be saving about $25,000 a year in postage. We mailed everything. We acted like emails were not in existence. Now we know they are emails in existence for our people. That's 50% of my postal budget, that $25,000. So I'm excited about that. In the next couple of months, we'll have a better idea about what it will do to the department's budget, and what the department's budget will be reduced by the changes we made to the appointment system. You might recall the fiscal note for Senate Bill 37 had a $5 million estimate on decreasing our revenues. I will say that I think we've been very conservative on that $5 million. We'll know more later, and we'll report that back to you. On the security side, the department put a moratorium on the securities fees for fiscal year 2022. It means approximately $16 million in savings to those people, those individuals that pay securities fees. And so that's a real win-win for them. Along with that moratorium, the department's conducting a business analysis to make sure that our fee structure fits the services that we provide and to better align those in the securities industry. And we'll be back with more information on that as the year progresses. I want you to know that we are always here to help your consumers, to help you, and to help you on any insurance or securities issues. Not every insurance product is regulated by the Department of Insurance, but rest assured, we have contacts. I've yet to find a problem that we don't have a contact in another agency to help your constituents or to help you with, and we will activate those, and we will make sure that you get to the right agency and to get assistance. As I've said many times, not only in my previous life as a legislator, but as commissioner, we will always get an answer. We will always strive to get you an answer. We might not always like the answer we get, but we're always going to get you an answer, and we won't leave you out there hanging. I thought I'd give you a fun statistic. In 2021, the Consumer Assistance Division worked and closed over 3,000 complaints and inquiries, and we're not a really big department. They returned $6.2 million to Kansas consumers. I'm pretty proud of that number also. I know that in our written comments to you, our written testimony, there's a couple of key staff contacts in there. Please feel free to use those. Mandy Rowe, Lee Modisette, and myself. I'm always open to a phone call or an email, whatever, however you run me down in the hallway, whatever you need, please let us know. And don't shy away from us. I dislike it when a legislator calls and goes, "Oh, I hate to bother you." You know what? It's my job to be bothered. So please bother me with your constituents' concerns and the questions. I traveled out to the wildfires the week before Christmas, and that was a very, it's a very sad situation for many individuals out there, but we are working with the individuals, and we are making sure that they're taken care of. I did survive the last round of redistricting that happened 10 years ago, and so I know you have a big session ahead of you, and first and foremost, good luck. It is a daunting process, but I know that you're up to the task. But in light of that, we have decided to give you a pretty small legislative agenda for our department this year. Of course, there's a little pressure with that. We expect 100% return. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. Not really. But we do. We are giving you a pretty toned down version. And the other thing is, you did so much for us last year with Senate Bill 37 and with our accreditation, and we would not have passed accreditation without several of those things. So I know time is running short, but I do want to turn it over to Lee Modisett, and he's going to outline our brief legislative agenda. I'm pretty sure he's going to get you out of here on time. Again, I really want to thank you for the opportunity. It is a great honor to serve as insurance commissioner, and I don't take that lightly. I love my job. I loved my job as senator, and the first year of insurance commissioner, I wouldn't say I loved it, but I learned a lot, and I really do love it now. And I look forward to helping you however we can on an insurance or securities issue. And I can stand for questions, or we can turn it over to Lee, whatever your desire is.
It is actually your call on that, and do take the time you both need. Don't let us rush you through information.
It's okay. That's about all I had to say. But I mean, I could tell you other stories, but I won't. But I couldn't think of anything embarrassing to tell you about Lee. Well, I could, but I think you said that you had to mutually agree that you were going to share it.
That was
and
part of the
I
deal.
didn't agree with him. So anyway, okay, I'll turn it over to Lee. Or I'll take questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You do understand when legislators say they hate to bother you, they're probably lying.
You know, I never lied as a legislator, so I don't think that's true, Representative Miller.
Commissioner, how long has the Securities Commission now been under your office?
2017 legislation. So 2018 was the first full year. I was not in the office at that time, and then I came into the office in January of 2019.
Could you provide us with some caseload data, both pre and post on that move?
So do you want to know number of cases that have been, that were active in 2017 versus now?
Year to year, if you could.
Okay, we can get those statistics for you.
But I'm just curious.
The
reason I'm curious is because at the time we looked at the change, it was a little unnerving how little was being done and by that department. And I'd like to believe that the activity has picked up.
I believe the activity has picked up, but I will tell you that there is a huge difference between the cases in securities versus the cases in insurance. The cases in insurance, we can flip through those pretty quickly, and we get, these.
Oh, I get that. My interest is in the security side.
Comparative, right.
Security side. I just want to see how things are going versus how they were going. And any explanations that accompany the data would be more than welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We will get that for you, Mr. Chairman. I take it we'll give that to you and for distribution, or to Colleen?
That would be great, and we'll get it directly.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions? Have we bothered you enough now? No.
That was a bother.
I know.
Just kidding.
Thank you for your work through accreditation. That was very important for the state of Kansas. Congratulations on doing that. Thanks for everything you did with the department, for what you brought and shepherded here to make sure that you didn't have to only rely on baked goods to get through that, because that was a big deal.
That's an important part.
Yes. Thanks for the work on reducing the costs and fees on both the insurance and the security side, as well as getting dollars back in people's pockets, as you mentioned at the end. So appreciate all of those things, and for having a better state of the judiciary. How about the state of the insurance department, or the state of the kid, KID?
I don't really like kid.
Okay, all right.
That connotation, I don't know. I guess having raised children, kids, I don't know, goats,
State of the insurance department. But thank you for that update and the work.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'll let Lee come up and talk about the legislative agenda.
Wonderful. Welcome to committee.
Quickly. Told him, but don't bring any papers up.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I did participate in the exercise, though. I learned something about the commissioner while you all were chatting. I've worked for this is my fourth session now, and she says, I haven't told you, she lost her hair in the 7th grade because of a bad perm, and she actually gave me permission to share that story. So, and Representative Collins is a SEK kid from the little town of Oswego. I could have done without the reminder of how many state championships Colgan has, but that right to the heart got me there.
Representative Miller, your question on security is actually a great transition to one of the items that we'll be bringing. You all may remember from last session, we brought a bill related to victims restitution. We intend to bring a similar piece of legislation with a couple of tweaks, and I think that'd be a good opportunity to kind of talk about how many cases we have, how long those go, the challenge of getting folks to come forward and admit that they've fallen victim to fraud, and what that process looks like. So that's one of our pieces of legislation. Of course, the ever infamous RBC bill, the big date change, that's a challenge every year. And then the other, on the insurance side, we also have rebating, which will be, I won't take too much time here, but it's kind of a technical change, if you will, of how rebating happens currently and how we would like to see it happen going forward. And then I don't know that it will get heard in front of this committee, but it will be part of the full legislative process. The fee pause that the commissioner talked about on the security side is in response to a settled lawsuit related to fees that those who are registered on the security side pay. As a part of that settlement, we're supposed to end the transfer, the automatic transfer at the end of a fiscal year of any remaining balance to SGF. And so we will be bringing a bill to permanently repeal that provision in response to that. So again, I don't know if that'll be in this committee or if it'll be in approps, but that will definitely be something that you all will have come across your plate regardless. So Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions now, or we can save them for when I have bills here.
So thank you, Mr. Modisett. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for the overview and bringing an update to us to get us rolling again on the insurance side. Very helpful for us. And with that, committee, thank you all, and we are adjourned.